Okay, so evolution is one of the big theories in biology. In fact, it's often said that without an understanding of evolution, nothing else in biology makes much sense. So, what evidence do we have to support the idea that life evolved? Well, we're going to start with things that people have seen within their lifetime. So we can see small evolutionary changes in a single human lifetime. 100 years ago, around 96 to 98% of female African elephants had tusks. Tusks are important for elephants. They use them to dig up roots and defend themselves against predators. But as the human population increased, there was a demand for ivory, and ivory is elephant tusks. Now we're starting to see more and more females who do not have tusks. In areas with a lot of poaching, the number of females with tusks can be as low as 2%, which means that in 100 years, we went from 98% of females having tusks to 98% of females not having tusks. This is a clear sign that only the tuskless females have been surviving and breeding. This is not a natural phenomenon. This is a non-random selection against tusks due to poaching for ivory. Because of human behaviors, the tuskless females are the ones who are more likely to survive. So we can see these kinds of changes. If we want to look over longer periods of time, we can look at fossils. There is a huge amount of fossil evidence. We can see clear changes over time. The horse, for example, shows in the fossil record a dramatic change from a small forest-dwelling individual, the littlest one in this image on the right, that had multiple toes, gradually becoming larger, 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 until we get the modern-day grassland horse. The images on the left show skulls of these different species, all of these intermediates, as well as the leg bones of these intermediate forms between the earliest horse and the modern horse. We have the same kind of evidence in lineages for whales and for humans. So we don't have these lineages for every species out there, but we have them for quite a lot of different species. And when we look at big changes, going from a fish that is an aquatic organism with fins to an amphibian which can live on land and has legs, turns out even just looking at modern fishes, we can see a lot of fishes that are probably what these evolutionary intermediates between fish and amphibians look like. So there are plenty of modern fish that use their swim bladders to breathe air from the surface instead of getting all of their oxygen through their gills. Think about the Siamese fighting fish, also known as bettas. There are lots of modern fish that can use their fins to move on land. The center in the middle is a walking catfish. walking catfish use their fins to move across the land when conditions dry out. And they do this on damp, rainy days, usually. On the right, these are some saltwater fish that really spend most of their lives on land. They want damp areas, so they're going to be right by the water, but they prefer to be on land. And they do most of their living on land. In the upper left is a representation of a species called Tiktaalik. So when you say we don't see these big changes, we see changes from horse to a horse, I would argue that nobody would recognize the early horse as a horse if you saw one today. But Tiktaalik is a great transitional fossil, showing clear changes between being a fish and an amphibian. It has a flat head with the eyes on the top, like what we see in crocodiles today. It has the ability to move its neck to look side to side, which fish really can't do. They kind of have to twist their body. And its front fins were positioned underneath the body. So they were strong enough that this individual could lift its belly off the ground. Okay, so fossil evidence, great. Humans have witnessed small steps in evolution, great. There's a lot of intermediary types of organisms that clearly show characteristics of both fishes and amphibians. Great. Let's also look at our genes. All eukaryotic organisms, all animals in particular, have some genetic similarity. We call similarity homology. H-O-M-O-L-O-G-Y. Homo means same. Some genes can be found in all living things, especially those involved in energy metabolism. And these genes can be found in bacteria, in archaea, and in eukaryotes like us, like plants, like fungus. We all have some genes in common. And certain genes are highly conserved in vastly different species. This means that the protein that's produced from these genes is very, very similar to the protein produced by these other genes. There's not a lot of genetic difference. So this image, I know it looks a little confusing to you, but at the top, there's a sequence for part of a gene from a mouse that's involved in making an eye. The next one down is a sequence from a fly. All the areas in green have the exact same sequence as that of the mouse. The protein that's produced is identical to the protein in the mouse. You could take this gene from a fly, insert it into the mouse, and it would function. We see the same kind of things looking at the gene in the shark, in the squid, and in a flatworm. We can look at what is called developmental homology. What this means is that during early embryonic development in animals, there's a lot of similarity going on, and it can actually be hard to tell embryos of different animals apart during the early stages. All animal embryos at some point in early development have gills. Even us. All have tails. even us. So these early similarities are strongly suggesting a common origin. Why wouldn't a fish do things differently in early development compared to a human, right? And the last category of evidence, related to the last one a little bit, is what we call morphology. Morph, M-O-R-P-H, refers to characteristics of structures like shape, like color. And what we're looking at here is bone structure. When we look at vertebrate animals, animals with an internal bony skeleton, there are a lot of similarities with these structures. Well, there are a lot of external similarities. We all have a head with a brain and sense organs. Our spinal cord runs down our back in vertebrates. And in this image, all of the tetrapods, this is amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, we all have the same arrangement of bones in our limbs. One long bone nearest the body, upper arm and upper leg, two long bones in the lower arm and lower leg, a bunch of little bones, and some digits, which we call our fingers and toes. So we can look at this image here, and it shows a human arm, a cat leg, a whale flipper, and a bat wing. And you can see, even though the bones are slightly different shapes and sizes compared to each other, there's the same organization. Most whales only have bones in their front fins. Some have remnants of leg bones that are now used in mating processes. The image on the right is a whale flipper that's had the skin removed. And you can clearly see the fingers in that flipper. If we had a bird on here, bird wings also have the same arrangement of bones. So there's lots and lots of evidence that supports the theory of evolution.